When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, late afternoon. User, Myston8. Posted, March 2nd, 1994.
Does a house have to be old to be haunted? I ask because my wife Trudy and I built this house on a parcel of land that had been empty since the Jumano people vanished, and yet there's definitely some kind of something going on. Now, I don't know that what's happening is ghosts exactly, but I've only got so many words to describe these things. Like I said before, Trudy and I had this place built in the early 80s after I finally made some real money. We had intended to raise a family here, but medical complications got in the way, and after taking some time to mourn, we decided to devote our time to animals instead. We turned our 200 acres into a shelter for all creatures, big and small, and while I know it's not the same as having children of our own, we've never wanted for love. As you might imagine, the shelter is a full-time endeavor, and it doesn't leave us a lot of downtime. In recent years, we've managed to increase our revenue and donations to the point where we can have some part-time help come in and give us a little time off. Sometimes I wonder if the things I've seen are actually new or if they've always been here and I'm only noticing them because of the breathing room we've had lately. The first thing happened when we were in bed. I woke up from a nightmare about something. I don't recall exactly what, and lay there in the dark listening to Trudy's breathing. You know how in horror movies people will see something in the dark, panic, and then realize that the whole time they've been looking at a coat rack or stack of laundry? It was the opposite for me. I woke up and assumed the floral pattern I was seeing in the corner of the room was one of Trudy's dresses hanging on the wall. It was not. When I looked, really looked, I saw that there was a dress in the corner, but it was being worn by a woman I didn't recognize. She was older than us, maybe late 50s, and appeared benign. It was like she was just watching us. When she saw me finally noticing her, she smiled before raising one white-gloved hand and giving a little wave. In an instant, she was gone. Over breakfast the next morning, I told Trudy about what I'd seen, and she gave me the cocked eyebrow look normally reserved for one of my bad ideas. She comes from a religious family and rejected all that outright after leaving home, so the notion of ghosts wasn't one she put much stock in. I pleaded my case as best I could, but she assured me I had to have been dreaming. After all, she said, we're the first people to live here. Of course, we weren't, not really, but I don't know that the Jumano people were big on floral dresses, so I had to concede the point. The next thing to happen wasn't so whimsical and is what finally drove me to this board. When it happened, Trudy was away at her sister's house and I was in the living room kicking up in my easy chair about to take another stab at reading Shogun. One of our dogs, a big black lab named Charlie, was sitting next to me on his bed, loudly snoozing away. It was just before 5 p.m. and I looked up from my book because the light coming through the living room blinds looked wrong. It was too deep and too orange. In the winter, the sun sets here around 5:20, so you expect to see a glow as it goes down, but this was extreme. I got up from my chair and looked outside to see if there was any reason for the change, but nothing looked unusual. Standing in front of the window as I was, the light I'd seen cast against the wall should have been blocked, but when I turned around, it was still there, and I couldn't look away. That orange glow was so strong it practically vibrated, and I felt my stomach start to knot up. Then the edges of the room started to go dark, not the edges of my vision, but the room as if it was filling up with thick black smoke that blocked out everything but the sick sunset. The knot in my stomach got worse, like I was about to throw up this sandwich and black coffee I'd had for lunch, or maybe just pass out. Just then, Charlie began to bark, and the air pressure in the room changed so quickly, my ears popped. As they did, the darkness receded like it was being sucked up with a vacuum, and the nausea subsided completely. Charlie kept barking, running up to the wall where I'd seen the oversaturated patch of orange light as if he was trying to run it off. It was shrinking, whether because of something he was doing or some other factor I couldn't identify, and within seconds it winked out of existence just like the woman in our bedroom had. When it was finally gone, Charlie gave one final "so there" bark and went back to his bed. I picked up my discarded paperback and flopped down in my chair next to him, feeling exhausted and mystified in equal measure. I haven't been that tired since the early days of the shelter when we were working 12, 14 hours to keep the lights on. Has anyone out there experienced something like this before? Are the two experiences somehow related? My family has no history of mental disturbances, and even if they did, that wouldn't explain Charlie reacting the way he did. And what would have happened if he wasn't here?
Subject, waiting for you. User, Sident5. Posted, August 18th, 1995.
My grandparents used to live in a nice little World War II era house that sat on the corner of a busy intersection in Branson, Missouri. It was white with a concrete veranda facing toward the road that got hit a good 3 or 4 times over the years by speeding cars that missed the turn. I was alive for the last hit, and man, if you've never heard a car smash full-on into a concrete wall at speed, you have no idea what loud really is. The driver survived, which was great for him and for me. Just seeing the accident was bad enough without also having to watch a man die. My grandma died of pneumonia in '88, leaving my grandfather to fend for himself. He was an old school kind of guy, which is code for pays the bills but is incapable of managing a household, and so my sister Mimi spent a lot of time over there keeping up the house. After about a year, Mimi called a family meeting and said she couldn't keep the pace up anymore. That between looking after Grandpa and his house, plus her full-time job, she was at her wit's end. She also had noticed some cognitive decline in Grandpa during her visits and was worried he might end up hurting himself or someone else if left alone for too long. After a lot of soul-searching and some hard conversations with him, We all decided together it was best if he moved into an assisted living facility. I've got to say that I have so much respect for how he handled those conversations. He had no idea how bad his non-lucid episodes had become and completely supported his moving. My grandfather was and remains a real gentleman, and I hope to God that when my time comes, I can conduct myself even half as honorably as he has. After the decision was made, he called his lawyer and had him draw up all the necessary paperwork to transfer ownership of his assets into a trust for the family. He said this would make the process of emptying and selling the house easier for us, as well as lessen the financial burden down the road when he finally left us. It took another month to find an appropriate facility and get him moved in, and he took to it about as well as anyone could hope for. I could tell it wasn't the same for him as living at home, but it was the best arrangement possible under the circumstances. After the house was cleared out, we sold it to a local couple named Beth and Gary. Gary and I had gone to high school together, and they'd just moved back from Springfield to start a family. Maybe 2 weeks after they moved in, Gary came to see me at the hardware store. Now, Gary might be a Democrat, but he's not a nut, so when he asked me if anything weird had ever happened in Grandpa's house, I had no idea he meant ghosts. I said that the upstairs windows were new and the roof had been replaced in '89, so if any of it were leaking, he'd want to speak to the people who'd done the work, but he waved me off. The house was fine, he said, but his wife had had some trouble. I'll never forget the way he said it. Trouble, like her car wouldn't start or something. I asked what kind of trouble, and he looked at the floor for a minute and said she'd been seeing a woman in the bedroom every night since they moved in. Hats off to Gary. No man had ever rendered me speechless before, but that did it. I just stared at him while he drew himself up and went on. Each time, he said, it started with the bedroom door slamming. Not the sound of it slamming, but actual slamming, so hard you could hear the knob rattle. He was a deep sleeper, he said, so he didn't ever hear it, but it always woke Beth right up. Once she was up, she saw a woman about her age walk from the doorway to the foot of her bed. According to Beth, the woman looked sad and confused before fading away. Like I said before, I didn't know how to respond to Gary, except to say that this had never come up before, but I'd ask around and see if maybe Mimi or someone else had something to offer. I called Mimi after work, and of course she was excited. She is definitely a ghost person and wanted to know more. I gave her Beth and Gary's number and told her to have at it. A week later, she called me, and this is what she said. After my call, she got a hold of Beth and invited her over to the house for coffee. She asked her to describe the woman she'd been seeing, and then Mimi brought out a photo album. Being into ghost and spooky stuff, I guess she had some ideas of how this was going to go. She asked Beth to leaf through the album and see if anyone in there looked familiar. Sure enough, a few pages in, Beth drew a sharp breath and said her. Her was my grandmother, of course, and I suppose I should have seen it coming. What makes it even more unusual, though, is that the photo she'd pointed out wasn't my granny as she died, but her as a young woman. Whatever doubts I might have had about this being some kind of fancy cooked up by Beth and Gary for whatever reason went away, because she might have known what Granny looked like at the end, but there was no way she could have guessed how she looked 60 years before. I guess Mimi told Beth that the next night my grandmother appeared, she should tell her that we had helped Norm, my grandpa, move somewhere he could be looked after properly. Well, when she did, my grandmother's ghost had, according to Beth, given her a warm smile before fading away. To the best of my knowledge, she's yet to return. Sometimes I wonder if she visits my grandfather up at the home, but never asked. The moments where he's really him are fewer and more far between these days, and I feel like when we do have time together, it's not my place to pry, but I do feel better knowing she'll be there to receive him when he finally crosses over.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.